Welcome back to our discussion on poverty, a topic on the unit current challenges facing the Indian economy. We have learned earlier about the meaning of poverty and also the different categories of poverty, the way we classify poverty, and then we also learn about poverty line and how many are there who are under poverty in India. Today, we'll continue with poverty and look at the main causes of poverty. Okay, so the what causes poverty? If we talk about India, we have to go back to pre-independence period, that is during the British rule in India. And we have learned those in earlier chapters about how British policies impact on Indian economy, impact on agriculture, impact on industries, and foreign trade, in social life. Not it. So we were exploited, and we were also in a very difficult position after independence. So that's the way we inherited the situation we are now. So if we were to look back at those conditions that were there, we have to understand that they are part of the problem that we face today. So let's just list down so 4 or 5 points what we were under the British rule. Number one, there was substantial deindustrialization in India under British rule. So most of it were industries, most of our industries then were destroyed because of the exploitation and because of the industrial revolution in the um, British Empire during those days. So our industries were affected. So that had has a big impact on industries even after independence. Number two, we know India is a rural economy. Majority of people are depending on agriculture. Even during British period, 70% engaged in agriculture. So agriculture had a very important place in Indian society. But British policies involve sharply raising rural taxes on agriculture that enabled merchants and moneylenders to become large landowners. So you understand, even though Indians were able to own land then, but because of the policies, they were becoming landless, and merchants and middlemen and moneylenders instead became prominent and richer. So the number 2 point that we inherited from the British was the tax and the emergence of moneylenders and landowners. Number three, during the British rule, what we sell outside, export, not it, was affected. And in fact, under the British rule, export food grains was um, on a huge scale, and as a result, 26 million people died in the famines between 75 and 1900. That's another reason that we are facing today, inherited from the past. The British Raj impoverished millions of Indians. Natural resources were plundered. India were known to have rich natural resources. You talk about forests, you talk about mineral resources, but all these were plundered and exploited for the sake of industrial uh, revolution in Britain. It's not it. So that's another problem that we face. And extremely high taxes we talked about imposed on peasants, on farmers, and that raised about resentment where you had uprising during those days, especially in 1857. You remember the Jallianwala Bagh, where Indians were shot at because of the uprising, is not it? So those were the things that we need to look at history, is not it? Because of those that were there affected what we are now. So knowing that history, we can look at the present. Why, even now, after 7 decades of independence, still we are having large number of people in poverty? First, let's look at agriculture. Even today, large majority of people, especially in rural area, they are still in agriculture and mostly small farmers. Small farmers, they don't own a large plot of land. And so therefore what they have is small land, less fertile land. And when they cultivate, they have to depend on rainfall. And rainfall, monsoon rain are unpredictable. It's not it. Sometimes you had flood, sometimes you had drought because of no rain. So that's affected the agriculture, affected the majority of Indian people. And secondly, we know population in India is very high, not only high, growth per year is high, and so agriculture was weak. People face unemployment. There's no other sources, alternative sources, no other choice people for jobs, but they had to depend on agriculture. And you understand when they had small land, population keeps on increasing, they had to divide that land, so the per head availability of land declined. And that's why led to fragmentation of land holding. So when there is fragmentation, there is no scope for benefits from farming, means the earning so less that it'll not be beneficial for farmers. So that's why they lived in a very precarious situation. That's about rural area, that's about rural farmers, it's not it. So that's why you'll find even today, even if they want to farm, they don't have money, so they have to take loan, they have to pay back. And like you've said, when there's drought or flood, their crops were damaged. So majority of Indian farmers suffered, and some of them even committing suicide because of that um, inability to repay back the loan. So that's why, that's the other reason why we had so many problems in agriculture in rural area. If we look at urban areas in cities and metros, that's why there is larger scope for employment there. Employment. So people from rural areas, they migrated for better livelihood. It's not that they hope to get employment there, but you understand, even in urban areas, industrialization could not absorb all these people. They fail to find employment in industries. They fail to find employment in services sector. So that's why most of them are casual laborers. And when they are casual laborers, sometimes they get jobs, sometimes they don't. So when you are casual laborers, you'll be vulnerable because you don't have job security. There's no security whether you'll hold this job for a long time, because in no time you'll be unemployed. There is no asset, they own nothing. Skills, they don't have much. Opportunities, they don't have much because they don't have skills. And there is no surplus, they have nothing to save to sustain them in the future. So most of the people, they migrated in search for job, hoping that they'll be employed. It's not it, but you understand, even in urban areas, there is a, a scarcity of job because of the slowdown in industries, because of the uh, service sector that cannot absorb them. So that's why they face poverty even in urban areas. And another reason why people are, like we mentioned, why they are still living in poverty, even though they want to find job, is because of the nature of unemployment, nature of employment, unemployment or underemployment, and the casual and intermittent nature of job in both these areas. Not that they make them indebtedness because they lived on debt, they lived on loan, they cannot repay that, they pass that debt from one generation to another generation. That's why the whole generation of families, they are impoverished, they are under poverty. So indebtedness is one of the significant factors of poverty. Why indebtedness? Because of loan. Why loan? Because they need to put money in the work, not to put money in agriculture. But you understand, sometimes they cannot recover, they cannot repay because of the inconsistency in the job that they are holding. So that's why unemployment is one of the reasons why people are poor. If you don't have job, you don't have income. No income means poor. That's the reason why people in India are poverty. under poverty. And what you find in India is as such, there is unequal distribution of income and assets. Those who are rich, they own more property, more assets, they have better jobs. So that's why distribution of income for them is high. But for the poor people, majority of them, they don't have assets like we've mentioned. They don't have jobs, they don't have employment. So that's why income for them is very, very low. So that's why in India you find distribution of wealth, income and wealth is unequal. And that unequalness also keeps on increasing, not it? Here we say that two distinct groups of society: those who possess the means of production, who can have um, something to do, they can own production, they can own some activity, they earn good incomes, and those who have only their labor, and we know labor, they are intermittent, sometimes they get, sometimes they don't, they trade for survival. That's why they are poor. So this gap between the rich and the poor keeps on increasing. So if we talk about poverty in India, if we talk about the reason why, the causes why, we understand it's multidimensional. It's not only one uh, cause, one origin of the problem. It's not it, but the root of problems are many, multidimensional for India. If it were to solve them, to address them, it has to be on a war footing. It has to do more to solve this poverty. So these are some of the idea to know about why in India, even after independence, we still live in an impoverished position. People majority are poor. And if you will list down these poverty like we've done, we can see from here these can be the result of social, economic, and political inequality, inequality in society, inequality in economic activity, inequality in political opportunity. That means there are two groups, no? the the weak group, the weaker section, and the strong means the richest class of society. That's why, because of these two group, people who are in the lower side, they remain poverty. There is social exclusion. Social exclusion, if we talk about India, because of creed, because of um, caste, because of religion, sometimes there is also that distinction. So there is exclusion in society for some section of the people. Unemployment is the main problem. Indebtedness, which is the reason of unemployment, is not it? If we are unemployment, you earn nothing. That means you are indebted. Unequal distribution of wealth. That's what we talked about. So these are the five important things that can be the core of the problem of poverty in India. And then if you look at the general reason, even though we have known those facts that we have just discussed, but in general, why we cannot solve this problem till now is because in India there is, number one, low capital formation, there is low investment, there is not much activity that are there. It's not because no one invests, or even if they invest, only the you can say those who have the means, those who have the income, those who have the power, they invest. It's not that even the government still cannot invest much as required. So that's why there is low capital formation. Infrastructure is very weak in India. Infrastructure, we talk about economic, we can talk about social, we talk about schools, talk about hospitals, we talk about streets, bridges, power generation. All these are weak in India, so they don't create employment. If they are there, people would get employment. Lack of demand. Lack of demand comes from lack of income. They don't have money. They don't earn money because they are not employed. So they cannot demand goods in the market. So the market becomes weak. So when the market becomes weak, production also affected. Industries also affected. Population pressure, that's another thing that we all know. Indian population keeps on increasing, land remains the same, employment opportunities also not growing. That adds to the problem. Lack of social welfare nets. These are the programs, the scheme from the government, these are also not that strong enough to help the poor. So you understand, if you look at this, there is, we can say, a mismatch between capital formation, investment, and population, number one and number four. It's not it. If we compare that, there is low capital formation and there's high population. That's why we have huge problem. If we think in another way around, suppose if capital formation is high, that means there is investment from industries, investment from government, there will be more infrastructure, there will be more industries, there will be more activity. Even if there is an increase in population, there would have been no problem. But that is not the case in India. We have population high, we have low investment. If we have high investment, high population, no problem. So that's the reason why, because of the mismatch between capital formation and population, adds to the problem. So these are, in general, why we find the problem of India very alarming, even till now, isn't it? So that's about what we want to talk about today. So what you learn? You learn about the causes poverty in India.